The Tiny Imperator is rerunning a second time during Phase 2 of the upcoming 4.4 patch. In this video, I explain how to properly build her and her team options should you continue using her in endgame. I'll not go over her kit as all of that information is easily accessible within a game. All you need to know is that she buffs attack and can trigger double skill for the DPS she's supporting. So obviously I've been using her with Anaxa in endgame for a while, so I'd say I have a decent understanding of how to properly play her. Again, disclaimer, I'm not a theory crafter, so some of the information might not be entirely accurate. Now let's see how she's ranked in the current meta by the infamous phainon. She's currently ranked T0.5 in both Memory of Chaos and Apocalyptic Shadow, and T1 in Pure Fiction. I don't really have any opinions on this rating because Cerydra is a specialist support, so her ranking depends on the DPS she is supporting. It just so happens the DPS she supports are better at Memory of Chaos and Apocalyptic Shadow than Pure Fiction, which is true to a certain extent. So let's take a look at what DPS, or I should say teams, does she work best in. The obvious answers are phainon and Anaxa, because she is also best in slot beyond just these two characters, such as Zeely, and an excellent option for upcoming characters Himeko Nova and Rin. She can also kinda work with My Day. I want to clarify that her double skill only works on skill, so it does not work with Danhen, Inhibitor, Lune, or Aglaya, for example, since their attacks are enhanced basic attacks. I know it works in currency wars, but does not work in actual gameplay. So what makes her an excellent support for these characters? She can copy Phainon's Meteor for massive damage. Anaxa double skill can turn to quadruple skill. Similar to Anaxa, Zeely also gains extra turns with Cerydra with her skill trigger. She can copy both Himeno Nova's powerful assist skill and Ren's enhanced skill. For My Day, she can actually copy his Godslayer. The only problem with My Day is he's HP scaling and Cerydra's attack scaling. Of course, you can force Cerydra to work for any other attack scaling DPS, but the impact is usually just not worth it. She can also technically work as a main DPS at E6, which I will not cover because it's just not realistic. I want to also take the time to discuss Cyrene's buffs on her, since it can matter if your main carry is an inferior's character. It increases the main DPS crit damage by 30%, but most importantly, she can refund one charge immediately on every peerage. This is extremely powerful since it can let her charge it much faster, and is quite useful on Anaxa teams. Unfortunately, despite all this, her buffs are objectively lacking compared to her contemporaries like Evernight, but that's another discussion. As of recording this video, the 4.3 banners are still up. The announcement of Cerydra rerun is coincidentally at the best possible time right now. All of her best DPS will run next patch, or is currently running this patch. It would be a good time to pick her up if you own any of the aforementioned DPS. If you happen to be a phainon wanter or owner watching this video, you should probably try to get his E2 first before getting Cerydra. For Rin, Himeko, and Anaxa wanters, it is advisable you get the DPS first, then pull for her. And if you're pulling for Anaxa, you might want to get Cyrene right now as well. Of course, you can also just pull for her because you like her. Let's talk about her Lightcone options. Usually her best in slot option would be her signature Lightcone, Epoch etched in Golden Blood, which increases her attack, recovers SP after using ult, and increases skill damage on the DPS she's supporting after she uses her skill. Other competitive options include Robin's signature Flowing Nightglow, Sunday's signature A Grounded Descent, and Sparkle's signature Earthly Escapade. Of course, Bronya's signature But the Battle Isn't Over also works. If you have none of the above, you can use the free restaurant Lightcone, the Forever Victual that can be obtained for free from Herder Shop, or if you manage to do the event when it was active. An alternative option is of course the infamous DDD Lightcone. If you play phainon, you don't really have to care about DDD, but for all the other characters, this is usually better than her other options at lower investments. Even then, it can still be worth considering for phainon if you're aiming for some weird zero cycle clear, but in general gameplay of phainon, her other Lightcone options are better. Basically for phainon, no DDD, otherwise use DDD. This is because when Phainon's in his ult state, Cerydra obviously cannot ult, so there's little value to using this Lightcone with him. Let's talk about her Relics set. Her best in slot is obviously the 4-piece Cerydra. This set increases speed by 6%, and when using a skill or ult on an ally, increases their crit damage by 18% for 2 turns. This can stack twice. No matter what team you're using her on, this is typically the set you want to use. Her only other realistic option is the 4-piece Ego set, but I actually do not recommend this set. Ego set is usually already only used for zero cycling and certain AV breakpoints. Most zero cyclers still use Cerydra on Cerydra. There is little to no benefit of running Ego on her. You're losing out on the Cerydra buffs, and the extra turns barely help. Her charge is capped at 8, so if she just takes turns, she will over cap that charge, and any further turn is effectively useless. It's a bit difficult to put it into words, but if you use it in practice, it is often more detrimental than beneficial. Basically, just use Cerydras and don't bother with ego. If you need to hit a certain speed threshold for whatever reason, you can also switch to 2-piece speed, of course. Her most popular planar option will be Lushaka, which increases her ER by 5% and increases the attack of the first character of the team by 12%. You should usually farm this set, but of course, there's also the infamous Vomvac set that advances her forward at the start of the battle. This set is really only used for certain low cycle clears in Apocalyptic Shadow, where AV matters. I myself have used the set in both APOC and Memory of Chaos for a faster clear. If you happen to be one of those people who is playing her with My Day, you can also consider the Broken Keo planar set that offers crit damage instead, since Lushaka wouldn't work. Just make sure she has 30% effect res. The main stats you want would be attack or speed boots, attack body, attack orb, and ER rope. The only sub-stats you need are attack and speed. However, building her sadly isn't this simple. You still almost always want speed boots. She gets 20 speed in combat because of her skill, so you want at least 140 speed. But in certain cases, you actually want her to be super fast. In the last Memory of Chaos, a Japanese player had their Cerydra at over 180 speed to zero cycle with Anaxa. That much speed was necessary to zero cycle for their specific setup. In other words, just adjust your speed to as much as you need, but usually at least 140 is recommended. For every team comp, you want ER rope except for the core fighting world bearing, phainon, who you actually want attack rope. This is because he will almost always be in his ult state, so you wouldn't really get to ult with Cerydra anyways. You'd rather just have more buffs in that case. Remember how attack buffs don't work with My Day? For My Day or any non-attack sailor, you will instead only care about speed on Cerydra to be as fast as you need her to be. You can prioritize HP or Def Body and HP or Def Orb in that case for more defensive stats. Speaking of which, even in her normal build, you still want some HP and Def on top of attack, so she has increased survivability. This is especially useful in sustainless runs. Because of her A2 major traits, it is typically recommended to try and reach 4,000 attack if possible, but this is not a hard requirement, and I encourage you to not think too hard about this. All this does is increase her own crit damage, which is quite inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, unless you're playing her as a main DPS. Just try and get as much attack as you can. 3,000 attack is usually more than enough to get by. For speed, just make sure you have at least 140. Alright, I do think there is a bit of variance on how to actually play her, depending on the team you're using her on, so I'll briefly talk about it. This is mostly drawn from my own experience, so it may differ for you. I almost always skill with her with a few exceptions. I typically only basic it if I'm trying to avoid my character from triggering Peerage for whatever reason. This could be helpful for Anaxo, where you want to time his Peerage properly with Cyrene's buffs. It's worth mentioning using Peerage on Phainon's normal skill isn't a bad thing. In fact, many faster clears have him using his skill twice so he can ult immediately after exiting his first ult. For My Day, you want to try and time the Godslayer properly with his Peerage. I'm not a My Day player, and only had some experience doing this in Currency Wars, so sadly I wouldn't know the exact specifics on how to do this, and in all honesty, if you're playing My Day, you're better off using supports like RMC or Tribby. If you're using Robin Lightcone, remember to snapshot the buff properly since it lasts for one turn only, as this was designed for Robin and not for Cerydra. If you're using DDD, just make sure you're utilizing the action advance properly. Alright, that pretty much sums up on how to play Cerydra. She has a highly specialized support designed to work with specific team comps and is a power support for them as well. Of course, she has flaws, but for these teams, she is currently the best there is. If you own any of the DPS she supports or just happen to like her, it would be a good idea to pick her up. Anyways, if you found this video entertaining or helpful, please like and sub. It would mean a lot to me as I continue making more Star Rail related content.